The modern world is now defined by a problem where all truth, all of our institutions, everything stable seems to have been washed away, but that to live also requires some kind of anchor. So we move around and there's a tension. Part of us wants to anchor ourselves to the world, but the other half of us wants to tear up all anchors because we know that they're all illusions. So now we have this balance to draw, and it's difficult because both principles seem to be mutually contradictory. And we want to approach the world with a one-sided stance. To balance opposites is fundamentally the most difficult task. So what I mean more precisely is this balance between truth and, you might say, understanding or experience, where we have the existentialist contention that every time I understand something, that I know it in my mind, I have to already understand it. I already have to have preceding knowledge to facilitate that understanding. If I learn a new language, I have to already understand language in order to develop that knowledge. I can't just magically understand it by intuition. So the kind of understanding that the mind generally has is an assimilative understanding. I take what I know and I add to it new things. But the problem is that all the things that I currently know and to which I assimilate new information, they depend on other bits of knowledge. So if I already know one language in terms of which I learn another, the knowledge inside of that language has to be based on some other knowledge as well. And that there is a chain of dependence where the knowledge that facilitates my understanding of my initial language is itself dependent on preceding knowledge to facilitate that understanding. And that this is an infinite recursive problem, so that it seems as though truth is fundamentally out of reach. So we walk around, we have these ideas about the world, and they are limited because we can't peer straight into truth. We always have to have something on our plate first. And if truth is supposed to be this pure thing, where we just understand purely with no distortions, then it seems as though truth is not accessible to us. So there is a pattern in philosophy where fundamental understanding is attempting to trace back all the presumptions in a theory or a belief and to not proceed until the absolute foundation is made clear. But the problem that I've elucidated is that it's not possible, that any making clear depends on stuff that is already clear. So I can't make the tools of logic clear. They simply are taken for granted, and they have to be. So if I want to understand my own experience, for instance, I can't analyze it in a sense. I already understand it with the tools with which I understand it. They are not subject to infinite analysis and understanding because there is no basis. So if I analyze my experience, if I try and understand it, really all I'm doing is altering my experience. I am casting my experience in a particular role and in a particular direction. But I can't find out its basis. I can't take experience back to some fundamental point and then go, aha, now I understand the whole thing. That's not how things work. All I can do is experience in a sort of reflexive way, where experience is analysis of experience. But fundamentally, the existentialist contention is that there is no bottom. There is no fundamental truth to be discovered that will explain everything. That is an illusion. Now, we have a problem, because while it is an interesting experience to walk about the world and see that no explanation has any fundamental basis, no foundation, and nothing solid, it does change our experience to feel that way. But it's not really possible to live that way all the time. We're always caught up in things that are necessary aspects of human life. Maybe we could live that way if we all went in for isolation, spend time alone like some kind of monk. Then we could probably live that way. But it's not really possible in practical life where you're constantly caught up in things. I mean, even for a monk, they have to eat at some point. They have to sleep. They have to do certain things that break them out of this feeling of bottomlessness. Because when there is no bottom to things, there's no justification for any action. Doesn't necessarily mean that you would stop, but there's no impetus anymore. If you can really feel that there's no bottom, that there's no ground, then you're not driven, because I suppose to be driven you need a solid force to push you. If nothing's solid, then nothing can push you. Now, the issue here is that there's this, we need to understand, we need to create these filters and to simplify the world in order to act, in order to do anything. And it's just a fact of life that you have to act. You can't just avoid it. So a good analogy for this is the problem of a map and the terrain it represents. So the map is a simplification and a caricature of the terrain, and is not real. It only reflects the terrain. However, so the existentialist might say that we've been spending our times with the maps right up against our noses, and we don't even know how to look outside of them, which is definitely a valid concern. But I think frequently that's an issue with the existentialists, is they don't recognize that there is a need for maps. That if you're lost in the woods, you're going to, and you have some paper, you're going to write little milestones to help you to guide yourself. Because in order to understand, in order to plot a course through the world, you have to create a map and you have to simplify it. So I think the problem is that people are going to plot a course. People are going to try and do things in the world, no matter how deep their understanding of this problem of bottomlessness, of the points of the existentialists is. Every person is still going to create. They're still going to have plans. They're still going to have goals, and at the very least, they don't want to be lost. I mean, people certainly have to defend themselves against hunger and cruelty and all these different things. So, in order to function in the real world, you actually have to simplify the world and create these maps. So that's definitely different to the existentialist perspective. But it's also an important thing to recognize that the maps are not reality. So fundamentally, we have lived as though the map is reality and mistaken it for reality for, I would say, since Plato, where the highest truths, these fundamental patterns, are substituted for the highest reality. So we do need to learn to set them down, but at the same time we have to recognize their necessity. Now, a map is good when it can be updated, and when it can be set down, and when it's in its proper place. If I live only by my map, then I tend to forget that I'm in a world. I'm in a certain terrain, and I'm now open to many problems. I can cut myself on thistles if I don't pay attention to what's in front of me. I can trip over rocks. My map is always going to be incomplete, and so I might fall off a cliff if I don't pay attention. Now, at the same time, even if I manage to avoid those problems, if I'm still looking at my map all the time, there's another problem, which is that I feel inauthentic. I'm not actually in the world anymore if I'm just hiding away from it in the nice enclosure of my map, because it makes me feel safe, because it's simple. So maps are necessary, but they're also fundamentally temporary. That's the real problem. That we've lived in the West for 2,000 years believing that we can find some perfect map, that there is some fundamental map of the world that would unlock powers, that would make it possible to be immortal, that would make something happen. That would be a perfect map. It would be the limit case of a map. But that is not possible. That is an illusion. And the truth of the matter is that mapping is useful. Simplifying the world is useful and necessary, but is always temporary. It is always fleeting. And we must constantly update our maps in order for them to have any use, which means that we constantly have to confront reality, as the existentialists implore us to do. But there's a balance to be struck here, where we have to read our maps and make our maps and update our maps. So we still have to put effort into this map creation process, this world simplifying process, in order to live. But we also have to learn the precise opposite, which is to set down our maps and to look at the world as it is and to not simplify it or explain it, which is a far more difficult task than the existentialists set themselves, which was merely to set aside the map and experience the things of experience in themselves without any distortion by theory. It's much more difficult to know when to set aside theories, because it's so tempting once we have thought a theory, to make it our reality. But that is a fundamental error which we must overcome.